My name is Victoria Fernandez, and I'm honored to be your Master of Ceremony in the 10th Annual Spotlight on Local Innovation, organized as part of the multiple events that Engineers Nova Scotia has organized as part of the National Engineering Month. I would like to invite Paul Mann to open this evening with a land acknowledgement.
Thanks very much, Salutatus, for coming tonight. I'm Pal Mann, the CEO and Registrar of Engineers Nova Scotia, and today I have the privilege of offering the land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which was first signed with the British Crown in 1726. Those treaties at that time did not deal with surrender of land and resources, but in fact recognized the existing title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. As we learn more about the nature of the relationship between settlers and Indigenous peoples, it's important that we're all mindful of how we all individually can make a contribution to the process of reconciliation. For my part, I review the 94 calls of action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report at least once a year to remind myself of what the recommendations were. Though many are beyond my ability to resolve by myself, by knowing what areas are unresolved, I may be able to take actions within my power to assist with the reconciliation process. Also, given that we are gathered here tonight to learn how engineers who are women use their skills and talent to make Nova Scotia a better place, it is meaningful that we take a moment to reflect on the many tragic cases of murdered and missing Indigenous women who will never get such opportunities. As we celebrate engineering achievement this evening, I ask that you consider the Indigenous persons who have been unable to fulfill their potential due to acts and events outside their control, on what we can do to improve things for everybody today, tomorrow, and the day after. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Tonight's event was organized by the Women in Engineering Committee, also known as WE. The WE Committee has the mandate to support women members and members of all underrepresented groups of engineers Nova Scotia with a vision to foster an engineering profession that is representative of our community. In addition to supporting and promoting women in engineering through networking events, lunch and learns, and mentorship activities, this committee works towards the organization's 30 by 30 goal, which is to increase the percentage of newly registrants identifying as women to 30% by 2030. Tonight, Spotlight's local innovation, it's a networking opportunity, but it's also an opportunity to see high-profile engineering projects that are taking place in the Maritimes. I'd like to take a moment to thank Catherine Risley and the Merida Rrecruitment Solutions for the founding partnership of this event. Catherine is one of the original members of the WE Committee, and she has been a part of the organizing committee for this event since the very beginning, 10 years ago. Thank you so much, Catherine, for your commitment, energy, and passion. Upon graduation, Rachel joined the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, where she works as a project engineer. Her role oversees all phases of contract work for bridge and highway construction. Currently, her position has her focusing on all phases of the Highway 107 Sackville Bedford Burnside twinning project. In her spare time, Rachel enjoys running, hiking, and other outdoor activities. Join me welcoming Rachel.
Hello. My name's Rachel, and I'm here to speak to you about the Highway 107 construction project that's currently underway. So it's the Highway 107 Sackville Bedford Burnside connector. Thank you for allowing me to speak about this project. It's very exciting. There's a lot of people involved, so I'm excited to share some details with you. So just for my presentation outline, I'm going to give a brief introduction. I'll go over the project overview, some project details, and then I'll discuss some of the construction challenges that we faced. So I'll start off with an introduction of the project. Does anyone here drive the Bedford Bypass or Magazine Hill on their daily commute? So I see a few hands there. So the Magazine Hill and the Bedford Bypass are the only direct links between Burnside and the Burnside and the Bedford Sackville areas. Over 40,000 vehicles use these roads every day. Traffic congestion associated can cause queues that exceed several kilometers. So the Highway 107 extension that's currently under construction will improve safety and travel times for commuter and commercial traffic. This will be a net positive effect on the overall highway network because traffic will be diverted between the Halifax, Bedford, Sackville, and Burnside areas. So this is just a map of the project. You can see it goes currently going through the woods. That's why anyone hasn't really seen any construction when you're driving through the area. So I'll start on the easterly end of the project at the Acrely interchange. So that started a little while ago. You've probably driven through some of the construction area that's there now. So you'll see the roundabouts in the interchange there, closer to that where it says Juniper Lake on the map. You drive westerly, eventually hitting the Burnside Drive interchange, which will have a Burnside Drive extension where you'll be able to get off or get on the 107 and connect to Burnside Drive. You'll continue westerly to the Anderson Lake interchange, and eventually you'll drive westerly across Rocky Lake Drive and connecting in the Highway 102. So project overview, overall it's a 9-kilometer controlled access 4-lane freeway with that 1.2-kilometer arterial connection, which is the Burnside Drive extension. So overall there's 3 interchanges, 7 bridges, 3 arch structures, and 9 roundabouts. That's just a photo of the Acrely interchange. That's where you can drive through right now partially. Project overview. So construction started back in 2019. The project's broken into 3 separate phases, which is multiple tenders and projects. Typically, we break those apart in subgrade contracts, structures, and paving projects. We break the construction out in phases so that we can do phase 1, starting with clearing and subgrade, then have our paving contractor come in while a subgrade contractor is working on separate phases, so we kind of go along in sequence that way. Target opening is the end of 2023, and the estimated construction costs are $210 million. So I'll go into some of the project details. So I'll start with subgrade. This project is a cut, fill, balance project, so basically any of the excavation that is reusable fill is placed on the project. Any surplus material from some of our rock excavation is actually crushed on site, and then we use that as our sub-base gravels. So part of the subgrade was a glacial till, which is silty sand. That was closer to the Acrely end of the project, in between Burnside Drive and Anderson Lake. Had some basically a lot of that work we have to do in the summer months since the glacial till is subject to frost and wet. If it's wet, there's some issues there. So most of that construction occurs during the summer months. And then from Anderson Lake to the 102, we have a lot of rock excavation with quartzite bedrock. That's something that the contractor can work through over the winter. And any of that material that is excavated, we can place over the winter since it's not susceptible to frost. There's been over 2.5 kilometers of concrete pipe installed to date. We still have some more to go, but that's what's installed to date, and 10 of those was water course crossings. So I have a photo there of them crushing, the contractor, which is Dexter Construction, crushing gravel on site near the Anderson Lake interchange, and then the photo below is just some culvert installation work. I'll touch base on some of the structures. So this project has 2 steel girder structures, 5 concrete girder structures, 2 steel arches, and then multiple mechanically stabilizer structures. We have a lot of those MSE walls surrounding our bridges, but there's also some areas where we have some retaining walls on separate areas of the project. So some of the arches shown there across the CN rail. We have an arch that crosses a water course, and then another one that crosses just a roadway. and then a lot of our bridges cross over just existing roads. I'll touch base a little bit on the paving. So there's 2 lanes each direction for eastbound and westbound, 3.7 meter lanes with paved shoulders. There's a 6th part of the project, like I said, was 9 kilometers. 6 kilometers of that is the cable barrier. We'll have a cable barrier median similar to what you'd see on the 103 when you're driving through that now that's open, and similar to the 101. And then the other 3 kilometers will have a Jersey barrier cross section, similar to what you see if you're driving on like the Highway 111. Pavement structure is 3 asphalt lifts. Then we have 150 mils of gravel type 1, which is like a 1-inch gravel, and 600 mils of type 2, like a 2-inch gravel. Photos there of what's been paved, some of the main line, and then also one of the ramps at the Acrel interchange. So I'll touch base on some of the construction challenges. First one is traffic impacts. Working near or on any of the active roadways, obviously we have to have traffic control. One of the biggest issues that one of the biggest challenges we've had right now is road closures. If anyone's driven on the 102 recently, I wouldn't be surprised if you got stopped by some of our traffic control. That's there because we have rock excavation near the highway, and we have to have the road closed for a safe distance so that traffic isn't driving through when we're blasting. So that's been a significant challenge, stopping traffic every day. We avoid closures as much as possible, but it's just something we couldn't avoid to build this highway. The other reason we need road closures is for things like girder erection. Some of the girders that we've erected already have been on some lower volume roads where we've had to close the highway for a weekend. But we're also running into some challenges where once we build the 102, 107 overpass, we'll have to erect the girders over the 102. So we're kind of working through that right now with the contractor and our traffic authorities of how to have the least impact to traffic as possible. Another challenge that we face is construction of roundabouts. We haven't started those yet, but we will in the near future. Some of the roundabouts that we're building is in active intersections, so basically we're taking a signalized intersection with traffic lights and turning that into a roundabout. We try and build as much as we can off the active roadways, but at some point we need to make that transition. We're doing things like working at night to avoid impacting the public during the daytime, but there's still the challenges of even if we're doing the work at night, we still need to make sure traffic can get through during the day. So that's just a challenge that we have to face, and we kind of work through those. That's just a photo of the contractor drilling on the 102, ready for blasting. The second construction challenge that I'm going to talk about is the unexploded ordnance. So in 1945, a fire occurred at Canadian Forces Ammunition Depot, Bedford, which resulted in detonation of ammunition on the wharf, which resulted in ordnance being dispersed across a wide area. So approximately 3 kilometers of the project corridor was subject to unexploded investigation. So basically in that 3 kilometer stretch, anywhere the contractor had to clear, had to grub, or do any excavation work, there was UXO technicians that did a scan of the area to basically ensure that there wasn't any unexploded ordnance that was a risk. Everything went fairly smoothly, however, it just took some extra time, some additional cost to the project that you don't normally have on your subgrade contracts. So the last construction challenge I'm going to talk about is just multiple stakeholders. So we have contractors, consultants, overhead utilities, underground utilities, and then railroad crossings on this project. We have those issues in multiple areas. I chose this photo with the Rocky Lake overpass because we basically had anybody that could be involved was involved. You can see in this photo, we had the contractor working, they have the MSC walls built. You can see a little snippet of the girders. So contractors and their subcontractors involved. You can even see the existing overhead utilities in this photo, and Nova Scotia Power actually working to relocate their lines. So we had to relocate the Nova Scotia Power lines and the communication lines that were there and run them through an underground duct bank. You can even see in the road cut by that black truck where we ran the duct bank across the road. So when we're doing anything underground, we have to check for Halifax water, any sewer, anything like that. And then Rocky Lake Drive is an HRM municipality-owned road, so we have to make sure that the HRM's involved and understands what's going on, because we're impacting their infrastructure as well. And then, of course, we're crossing the railroad, so CN's involved. We have to have them approve any of our work. If we're working within 30 feet of the tracks, CN has to have a representative on site to oversee any of the work. So this was a huge challenge. We had to have multiple meetings weekly to sort out some of these issues, but eventually the girders are erected now. We're still working through construction, but this photo just kind of highlights how many people can be involved in one area. And we have this kind of working in the city. We have multiple people involved kind of all over the project. So that's all I really have to say. This project, like I said, we're hoping to have open the end of the year. I understand there's a lot of traffic involved, which impact a lot of people. So I think this will be everyone will be. It'll be a good improvement for the highway. So, yeah. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Rachel?
Yeah, I was just wondering who owned the land. Like, was it? I'm over here.
Sorry.
Yeah, was it HRM owned land, or I guess who gets to decide how the land gets used?
So we have multiple discussions with HRM before we have. They're working on some other projects in the area, but anytime we're working near their property infrastructure, we usually reach out to them and get involved, just to talk to them about what's going on. We have a good working relationship. So we just have open discussions about what's going on in land use.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I was looking at the one photo you showed where you had the culvert going over the rail line, and I'm curious how that was constructed. It looked like it was in segments, and the rail line was left in service. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So they would start excavation. There's footings beside the railroad. So they start with excavating those, and then the arch sections come in a couple meter sections, and they're lifted in place.
Hi, Rachel. Great presentation. As a civil engineer, nothing gets the heart flowing like glacial till and arterial roadways. It's fantastic since we've had a hard infrastructure project like that. From your perspective as the engineer working on this project, you've got lots of engineers, lots of specialties, you've got contractors, a bunch of different stakeholders involved. How have you personally found working together, collaborating, and how do you solve some of the challenges that come up when you don't agree?
So working on a project of this size, a lot of the people involved are involved for a long period of time. So it takes a little bit of time to build those working relationships. I find the best way is just having open communication with everybody that's involved, especially when we're getting into areas with multiple stakeholders. Basically just having multiple meetings and being open and honest about what's going on. I find that's really been helpful. Disagreements are always going to happen, but we just need to kind of work through it. And
Hey, I'm not an engineer. I'm just curious, in the initial picture you showed that it's going through sort of a forest wilderness area. When you're building these kind of things, is there any consideration for wildlife corridors or fencing in terms of, vehicle wildlife conflicts?
so any project of this size, especially this project, we had to go through an environmental assessment. So during the planning phase of project, the Department, Nova Scotia Environment's involved, Department of Natural Resources involved, and they get their input on what their needs are and what they're looking for. So that's part of the initial planning phase of project before we even get close to construction.
Hello, I'm third year environmental engineering student at Dalhousie, and some of the ladies here, we're still students, and we look at you as a figure that we look up and forward to. What do you have to say to us that think that the workforce are in the very, very far future, and we feel like we're going to be students forever and never feel that we'll be the boss like you one day?
I keep working at school. I mean, school's a long time. It's hard. It seems like it's lasting forever, but as soon as you get into the workforce, time flies. I've been working for the department for 5 years now, and it feels like I just started yesterday some days. So that's really all I can say. Once you're out of school, it doesn't take long, and you start to gain some experience and be in a position like I am, or like any of the women in this room. Yeah.
We have one more. So.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask, certainly when the project started, was there any consideration given to looking at Indigenous perspectives on the land, recognizing, of course, it is the shores of Jubuktuk. So I was curious if that got brought into the review of the contracts, and also if there's any interpretation of Indigenous culture and traditions as part of the project.
Yeah, so that's also involved in the planning phase before the project goes out to tender or starts construction. We have a highway planning and design team that works downtown, and they're involved with all the consultations before the project goes out, and also those inputs people are given their input as well. And then also there's consultations throughout the project that goes on, so they're constantly informed and updated on the project status.
Any features that incorporated the Indigenous traditions and culture as part of the construction?
Not that I can say off the top of my head right now. That is it. Yeah.
Thank you. Our next presenter, Dr. Wendy Kirskosek, is the Water Quality Manager with Halifax Water, where she brings over 20 years of experience in water quality management. Her role includes working with treatment, water quality, and distribution operations staff to conduct water quality research. Wendy received her Bachelor of Applied Sciences in Civil Environmental Engineering from the University of Waterloo, followed by a PhD in Civil Engineering at Dalhousie University. Currently, she serves the water community as the Technical Director with the Atlantic Canada Water and Wastewater Association, and as a member of the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association Water Quality Committee. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kirkosek.
This up a little bit. Good evening, and thank you for sticking around. It's wonderful to see such a full room here. And thank you to Victoria for the introduction, and to Engineers Nova Scotia for the opportunity to be here today to talk to you about Halifax Water's journey towards full lead service line replacement. And I want to acknowledge that while my name is the only name on this slide, I'm far from the only person that's contributed to this project. Lead, while it's only a pipe in the ground and seems like an easy problem to solve, actually involves pretty much every department at Halifax Water and lots of folks beyond Halifax Water as well. So this is really a team effort to be here to present this to you today. And so before I get started about talking about our journey, we are a broad audience, so I want to kind of talk about lead in drinking water and why it's unique and why it's a problem for utilities across North America and beyond. And first and foremost, it's different than most things we generally treat for, in that it's not something that you find in our lakes that we need to remove through a treatment process. It is a function of legacy materials. So it's through the use of historical lead service lines or lead tin solder, and that's the reason why we have lead in drinking water. So it happens through corrosion processes when these materials come into contact with the water, and lead is released and ends up at the tap. And so it's a different problem that we have to solve from a water treatment perspective. And as a utility, our responsibility is really to ensure that the water that we provide is non-corrosive. So we ensure that we optimize corrosion control treatment so that we minimize that lead release at the tap. But at the base of it, we need to get the lead out in order to solve this problem. Another issue is that lead varies both in space and in time. So lead exposure in drinking water is often higher when it's warmer in the summer months. And it also varies with distance in the distribution system, which I'll show some maps in a moment. But it's really just in areas where we had lead service lines historically. So you can think about the older parts of Halifax and Dartmouth. Furthermore, it's also a shared responsibility. So our distribution system doesn't have lead pipes, where the problem is the service line that connects our water mains to the home. And that becomes a shared responsibility between the utility and the homeowner, which creates challenges when we're trying to get it out because we're not responsible and we don't own that infrastructure. And then lastly, we've known for a long time that lead is bad at high concentrations. It causes lots of different problems. But more recently, we've found out that it's also really bad at low concentrations, and it affects the neurological development of children, particularly those under 6. And so that's led the CDC to state that there's really no safe level for lead. So really, we want to get our lead exposure as low as possible. And so we think about sources of lead in drinking water. Like I mentioned, the largest source is lead service lines. And so lead was a wonderful material because you can just move it around, and it's really flexible, malleable, and it works really great. The problem is it's not great for our health. So we stopped using it in Halifax sometime, based on all of our experience, we think it's sometime in the late 40s or early 50s, but we use 1960s as a cutoff to be conservative in where we think they may be. But beyond lead service lines, there are other sources of lead as well. So any home that was built prior to 1986 probably has copper pipes that contain lead tin solder as well. And that, while not as large a source of lead as lead service lines, it can be a contributing factor to lead at the tap as well. And then lastly, there's brass fixtures. So all of those internal components of our fixtures, even if they say lead-free or low lead, often do contain lead within the brass. And so those can be a contributing factor as well. So if we look at that shared responsibility, this is really one of the cores of the problem that we have getting lead out of the ground. So we have the water main that runs through the street, and then we have the pipe that connects the water main to the home. Half of that pipe from the water main to the property line or the curb stop is owned by the utility, and the other half is owned by the property owner. So when you're a property owner and you're going to purchase your first house on Peninsula Halifax, you can see that roof, you know that roof may need replacing, and you walk inside and you say, oh, that fridge is really old, I'm gonna have to replace that fridge. But what you don't often realize is that you're also responsible for that buried infrastructure outside. And it's quite costly if your sewer lateral fails or your water line fails or is lead and needs to be replaced. That's thousands of dollars that you may not have been expecting when you purchased that home. And so what does the situation look like here in Halifax? This is a map we've created which shows our best guess at where areas are that could contain lead service lines. And this is drawn based on institutional knowledge and historical records. And essentially what we've done to create this is looked at any area that could have been served by a centralized water system prior to 1960. So in Halifax, that would have been the community served by Chain Lake originally. And in Dartmouth, it would have been the community that was served by Lake Lamont. And so this is kind of what we end up with. And again, some of these areas are a little bit on the conservative side, so we have a little bit of a buffer there. But within this area, we have 23,000 total service connections. And of that, this table shows our inventory of what we know for lead and unknowns. So we have about 1,200 public lead service lines left, and about 2,800 private, and then we have a whole host of unknowns. And that becomes one of the other problems that we have trying to get lead out is finding it in the first place. It's buried infrastructure. We can't find it unless we see it. So that becomes a big challenge. And The reason why we have so many unknowns is due largely to historical record-keeping practices. So this is another way to look at our records through the lead service line boundary, and you can see there's a big difference between Halifax and Dartmouth. And in Halifax, we see lots of green. So green is good, green is copper. Red is lead, so that's not what we want to see. The black represents materials that are usually associated with larger services and commercial buildings, and gray is unknown. So Dartmouth has a lot of gray. And that is due to the fact that they didn't necessarily record service material when they were doing work or when they were installing services in the city of Dartmouth historically. So we're largely running blind in Dartmouth. And where you do see the green dots are where we've actually dug down at the service box and looked to identify what the material is. In Halifax, we're in much better shape. We have better records. It's still not perfect. There's lots of errors, but we're working on improving that as time goes on. And so now I'll get into the evolution of our actual program. And really, we've had some form of a lead service line replacement program since the 70s. In Dartmouth in particular, although there's lots of unknowns, we also know that they had a pretty aggressive program in the 1970s to remove at least the public portion of the service line. And so we don't see that many service lines in Dartmouth that are lead. It's more so in Halifax. And so up until about 2011, we were replacing lead service lines on an opportunistic basis. So if we were going in to do a water main renewal and we came across lead services, we would replace the public portion because that's what we own and that's what we're responsible for. And we'd often send a letter to the homeowner to say, hey, your portion of the service line is also lead, you may want to renew this. But you can imagine receiving that letter and contacting contractors and saying, oh, this is going to be $4,000 or $5,000, $10,000. I'm not going to do this at this point in time. So we had really little uptake. And about this time, starting in 2007, actually, we developed a research partnership with Dalhousie University with Dr. Gagnon and Dr. Stoddard, who's here today as well. And one of the early problems that we looked at was distribution system water quality and looking at factors that affect lead release. We're also really lucky to have Dr. Truman, who is the author of the paper that shows this sort of sentinel figure, I would say, which is something that's widely used and known in the water industry now, and that is when we conduct a partial replacement, so when we go in and just replace the public portion and leave the private portion as lead, we actually make the situation worse. We create new galvanic connections, and Ben could talk your ear off for days on why it's a problem, but it's a problem. And so the industry best practice now is to only do full lead service line replacement. So the problem is, how do we do that when we don't own it? And so after this paper was published, well, before it was published, but once we knew the results, we implemented a policy at Halifax Water that we were no longer going to do partial replacements. And you can really see the impact that that had on our lead service line replacement numbers. So the orange on this figure is private replacements, and the blue is public replacements. And you can see in particular our public numbers really dropped after we implemented this policy change. And so we were sitting there scratching our heads. How are we going to get this lead out of the ground? Clearly the way we were doing it wasn't the right way. And at this point in time, we started deferring some decisions on infrastructure maintenance because we didn't want to target high lead density areas because we knew we wouldn't be able to accomplish full lead service line replacement. So we needed to make a change. At about this point in time in 2015, the US was in the process of evaluating their lead and copper rule, which has been a pretty big deal in the water industry there for the past 7 or 8 years, I would say, is probably an understatement. But one of the first things that came out was a recommendation from a working group on a new paradigm, a new approach to tackle this problem. And it presented 5 pillars. And it really changed the way the industry looks at lead service line replacement. And rather than just focusing on what the utility owns and providing low corrosive water, it really talked about engaging the homeowner, engaging the community in the process, developing an accurate inventory, and achieving full lead service line replacement. So at this point in time, we said, this is a really good approach. I think this could work. Let's adopt this approach. We're really going to try to bring the homeowner along, and we're going to try to reduce the barriers to replacement so that we can actually get the lead out of the ground. So we developed a business case. We presented it to the board, and it was accepted by the UARB in 2016. And that allowed us to develop a rebate program. So we were then able to offer 25% rebate for the private side replacements up to $2,500. We also had a lateral loan program, which I think has yet to be used, but it was a great idea at the time. And you can see the impact of this change and reducing those barriers on our replacement numbers. So our numbers went up. We had those early adopters, those who the financial burden was just a little bit too much, and all of a sudden this was enough incentive for them to be able to replace. But we also saw the writing on the wall and realized that after a couple of years, we were going to start to run into problems. Those early adopters were going to be gone, and the folks that had lived in the homes for 80 years, or the landlords who had no interest in replacing, were still going to have no interest in replacing, even with our rebate. And the other problem that we ran into was the best way to replace a lead service line and the cheapest way to do it, the least disruptive way, is to do it when other work is going on. So we try to integrate with HRM on paving projects. We integrate on our own capital projects. But when we have to send letters to homeowners to convince them to replace about 4 months ahead of a project, again, even with a 25% rebate, it's tough to come up with that cash. So what ended up happening is 4 months after the project was complete, we had beautiful fresh pavement, and we'd suddenly get homeowners contacting us saying, hey, I have the money, let's go and replace our lead service line. So you can imagine the complaints that we would get from cutting fresh pavement 4 months, 2 months after it's been laid. So not the best use of taxpayer and ratepayer funds, and so we knew we needed to make a change. So we went back to industry and did a scan. We looked at about 50 different utilities in the US. The US is a little bit further ahead of us. And really it came down to two options. We could either offer a carrot or we could offer a stick. So carrot being, we'll replace your lead service line, we'll pay for the cost. And the stick being, some sort of mechanism to force replacement. So we weighed the pros and cons of these processes, and the stick approach would have resulted in a lot of additional work on enforcement, and I think in all of our opinions, it's better to spend that money on getting the lead out of the ground than on enforcement. And we would have had a lot of refusals, and we still would have had scheduling conflicts and issues trying to get homeowners to come on board. And so we presented the business case, with the ability to plan work and actually batch this work together and integrate with HRM, integrate with our own teams. We were able to show that we'd be able to reduce the costs to somewhere near the costs that we were currently paying with our program for a 25% rebate and this sort of one-off reactive approach. And so that approach, one, is the most protective of public health. It takes out of the play affordability and the landlord concerns that we have. So it's an equal playing field. We're getting all of the lead services out. So that's the approach we went with. And so in 2020, we got board approval, and then we went to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, and our program was approved first in Canada to pay for full lead service line replacement from the main to the meter. So pretty big achievement and accomplishment. And we launched our first year in 2021. And our goal is to get all the lead out by 2038 or sooner, hopefully sooner. And you can see the impact that the new program has had on our replacement numbers. We've jumped, and that's largely because we now have control over the timeline in the planning process. We can actually integrate on all of those projects and do things cost effectively. So it's been a long journey. It's far from over, and now we spend a lot of time sort of sharing our experiences with the industry in order to help other utilities along that are just starting on this journey. And while we now have a great program, and we continue to make strides to be more efficient in the way that we spend our money so that we can get lead out of the ground faster, there's still lots of challenges, and we still need to move forward. And a couple of areas that we have problems with, again, is it's buried infrastructure, and those records, those unknowns, are really troublesome. It costs a lot of money to go and even just dig one hole to look at what the material is. And so we're working with a company to develop a machine learning model So using some pretty innovative approaches to take some of that hydro-excavation data and let the model sort of learn over time and tell us where we should be focusing our efforts, where the most uncertainty is, and focus our resources on digging those ones up as opposed to the ones that have more certainty in being either lead or copper. So that allows us to sort of be more efficient in where we're spending our money and get the lead out of the ground. And then also, you know, we still are going to have lead in the ground for quite some time. We still have the lead tin solder, and so we still need to make sure that we are ensuring that we optimize our corrosion control treatment. And so that's when our research partnership with Dalhousie comes into play and is continually working new innovative methods and processes. This is a figure here from Dr. Truman's paper in progress, looking at a new approach to monitor impacts of corrosion control treatment at full scale. Which is hopefully going to be published soon. So the path never ends. You know, we've spent a lot of time learning from research, turning research into practice, learning from other partners in the industry in order to develop our program. And so with that, again, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's contributed to the success of this program over time, and please help us to get the lead out. Spread the word. If you live on the peninsula, send us an email. Go to our website. Tell your friends. We want to get the lead out of the ground. Thank you.
I was certainly happy not to see my house in red. Any questions? Oh,
I have a question is, how do we detect if there's lead in our own water? And if we detect it, how can we do to prevent it coming to us, like as personal thing?
Give us a call.
Let's say you go to a different country, you have the other lead. How do you prevent us injecting those lead into us?
So, you know, if you don't know what your lead concentrations are, you don't know the materials, the best thing you can do in the morning is to open your taps and let them flush. A large part of the problem is when water sits in contact with lead components, you get a lot of those chemical reactions happening and you get the higher lead concentrations. So if you flush your water, it reduces the lead concentrations. There's also pitcher filters and tap filters that you can put on that are certified for lead removal as well. So there's lots of things you can do as a homeowner on your own. There's accredited labs where you can send samples for analysis as well. So there's lots of different opportunities. And contact your local water utility. Ask questions.
Thanks, Wendy, for a really interesting talk. I'm just wondering, how often do you encounter a situation where a homeowner says, it's not a matter of money, it's my property, and I see your figures, CDC, et cetera, but my perception of risk is not the same as yours? Do you encounter that? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
Yes, and honestly, I thought we would encounter it a little bit more, but since we launched the new program, I don't think, there's only been one property that refused the lead service line replacement, and their reasoning was quite legitimate. They had somebody living in their basement that had accessibility challenges, and there was a whole host of other things. So it was, you know, they wanted to, but it wasn't going to work. So beyond that, we had lots of problems prior when we only offered the rebate. One of the interesting things we have in parts of Halifax, in post-war housing, we often have Y services. So there's one piece of public infrastructure that then splits into two private service lines. And so when you get one side that's lead, or both sides that are lead, and one homeowner that wants to renew and the other one that doesn't want to spend money, you run into problems. So that's where our new program comes really handy.
Hi, Dr. Wendy. It's, as you know, there's going to be a theme in the questions that I ask. The technical presentations that we get here are fantastic, and your university education, your undergrad and your postgrads prepared you for the technical problem that comes in there. I'm interested if you could share your perspectives on some of the professional skills that help you do your job, the communication, the teamwork. How did you gain the skills to manage those issues that help you implement the engineering solution? I think many of our students here are focused on the technical part, and I'm just trying to get your perspective how important those other pieces are to being an effective engineer.
Critical. And I would say that I was extremely lucky in that my grad program was in a lab that had a ton of opportunities to present my research, communicate with stakeholders, and also become involved in organizations. So in my intro, I'm part of the ACWWA and the CWWA, and all of these organizations have young professional committees, and I strongly urge you to get involved as a young professional, get to know people, build your network. There are people I met as a grad student that are, now I meet once a year at conferences, and it's wonderful to see how their sort of paths have gone and to reconnect with them. And that's been huge, and developing all of those skills through that sort of networking. A lot of those opportunities also come with workshops, graduate student workshops, and things like that, where you work on some of those sort of softer skills, but equally important skills. So I would say get involved, because it's critical to being a successful engineer.
Yes, I've just got a question about the future. With the, for your current replacement piping, I presume is what, PVC or some other material that I'm unaware of. What do you foresee as the life of the piping that you're replacing, or those of us that have housing that is in the post-lead installation?
So we're replacing with copper. And so I think the lifespan of copper is quite long, so I don't anticipate that to be a problem for quite some time.
Yes, hello, just one question. Why is it so urgent to get rid of all the lead? Why can't everybody just buy a $50 filter and then filter their water and then get clean water? But why should we get rid of all of it in the ground?
Great question, and I think some people would probably take that view that let's just filter it and it'll be great. But I think you're not really ever solving the problem, and you're also assuming that everybody's going to have the same level of education and that everyone's going to take those precautionary steps to protect their health. And I don't think that would ever actually happen, and so I think the real solution is to just get rid of the problem. Address the problem. And from a water treatment perspective, our corrosion control program uses a phosphate-based chemical, which is our most expensive chemical. And we have to have it at a higher dose when we have lead service lines to protect public health. But in the long run, we don't want to be using that much corrosion control chemical, both from a global phosphorus perspective as well as downstream wastewater impacts and things like that. So from our perspective, it's get the lead out so that we can then sort of maintain corrosion control treatment at a lower cost and be more effective with our resource use.
Hello. You spoke to the desire to find efficiencies working with other departments in Halifax Water with HRM and to, it sounded like, almost get to a cost-neutral spot with your rebate program. I'm wondering if you can speak to the challenges you faced in potentially talking with those other groups to find those efficiencies and how you overcame those challenges.
I would say it's still a work in progress. Our program is still in its infancy, so we're learning a lot, and our organization is changing a lot as well. So we're now kind of trying to find where the home is for certain parts of this program and how we can integrate it into other programs that we have at the utility as well. So to sort of take advantage of other work that's already ongoing so that we're not duplicating efforts. And we've had a great relationship with HRM for years on this, and I think it's now better when we're actually removing the lead service lines and saying, instead of saying, sorry, we can't do it. So.
Hi, thank you for a very informative presentation. I heard you earlier give advice that's a little bit practical for us to run our water, let the water flush out. And so I just wanted to ask a little bit more about that. So is this more important for water that we're drinking, or is it equally as important for water that we're bathing in or cooking with? Should we follow that rule for all water in our homes?
Water that's ingested, so, and used for cooking as well. So anything where you're preparing food, or because you can have, the lead can actually accumulate in some of the foods. So say you're boiling some pasta, it can accumulate in the pasta. So anything that you're using for cooking or drinking, but for showering, it's not a problem.
Hi. So, working for a company that has that's pretty old and has a lot of old records, and maybe the record keeping wasn't great, like you said, that you don't really know where all the lead pipes are throughout Halifax and Dartmouth, and that you have to basically dig a test pit to figure out if it's lead or if it's not. Have you guys tried any non-destructive testing and has it worked, or has anything stood out?
No, there isn't a whole lot out there for material identification. Some folks swear by sampling for lead to determine whether there are sources of lead, and that's great when you get a hit for lead. It can tell you there's a source, but if you get a non-detect, it doesn't mean that there's no lead service line. It just means that that sample didn't have lead. So there aren't really any methods. There was hope. There was a Water Research Foundation project a few years ago that was looking at sort of more ground penetrating radar type work to identify differences in, I think, conductivity possibly between materials, but I don't think that materialized. So there's nothing yet. If you can invent it, you'll be a millionaire.
To piggyback on the records question, it sounds like this project's been going on for several years, but I'm wondering if there were any takeaways for Halifax Water in particular, around the records, or what can we do better to make sure that we can make it easier for ourselves in the future? I don't know, maybe they already kept better records before this came up, but was there anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think sort of independently we've made some big strides with implementing different sort of software programs and having actual digital records that are done, work order processes and that sort of thing. So all of that stuff is captured a lot better now than it was historically, with somebody writing on a tap card, and initialing and abbreviations that nobody really knew what they meant, and those sorts of things. So I think just moving into the digital age and having everything in one place has really helped with our record keeping.
Hi, thank you very much, Doctor. My question is about kind of the map that you showed about the Halifax and Dartmouth area. I couldn't help but notice some of the main areas on the Halifax side that were still red were along primary thoroughfares. So I'm wondering if there's a targeted effort to kind of unite the homeowners who live on those main streets to try to do that kind of all at once, because taking down Bears Road or Shabukto or one of those areas would be really challenging.
That's why they're still red.
I may be asking because I live on Shabukto Road, but.
So one of the main benefits of the program we have is we can actually integrate on other projects. And so the way we're trying to do the majority of our replacements is through that integration process. So when HRM is ripping up a street, we're in there. So we're not ripping it up twice. So for some of those bigger streets, they may be a little bit longer until that sort of project comes to fruition, but they will all eventually get done as part of that project, those projects. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Kirkosek. Our final presenter is Dr. Amina Stoddart. She holds a Bachelor of Engineering in Biological Engineering and a PhD in Civil Engineering from Dalhousie University. She is an assistant professor in the Center of Water Resources Studies in the Department of Civil and Water Resources Engineering at Dalhousie University, where she focuses on broad research in the water and wastewater treatment field. Currently, Dr. Stoddart and her team are conducting research in wastewater treatment plants, working on process optimizations and innovative testing methods. Joining me, welcoming Dr. Stoddart.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to talk about this project. So I'm going to talk about wastewater surveillance today, and I thought about past, present, and future, and I think our past is quite recent with this project in that it's just been over the past 3 years, and present, and then sort of where we're heading, and largely focusing on our work here in Nova Scotia to develop a wastewater surveillance program for COVID-19. So what is wastewater surveillance? I think with COVID-19, we've seen a bit more of this technology and this approach, and it's a little bit more at the forefront. So when we're talking about wastewater surveillance, we're talking about monitoring community health indicators by analyzing wastewater samples, so municipal wastewater samples, for the presence of chemical or microbiological indicators. So looking for what could be in that wastewater to indicate that there's COVID-19, for example, in our population. And so this has been used, prior to the emergence of COVID-19. It had been used in the past, but hadn't really been at the forefront of our thinking, and we hadn't really been using wastewater in this way, sort of more public-facing. So it's been used for polio virus in the past, and used for illicit drug use. There was a StatsCan study a few years ago, pre and post legalization of cannabis, where they were looking at testing wastewater for cannabis metabolites, pre-legalization and post-legalization, to gain a better understanding of the use within communities, because it's a method that doesn't require surveying, it doesn't require asking people about their behaviors, it doesn't require going to a hospital or a test or anything like that. So it has some interesting abilities, I guess, for wastewater surveillance. And so, but wastewater surveillance really came to the forefront, and we started to see it a little bit more mainstream and gain a lot of progress through the COVID-19 pandemic. And so when we're thinking about wastewater surveillance, particularly for COVID-19, we have, as we know, our viral transmission within our communities. Those that are infected with COVID-19 then shed the virus in their wastewater. And so that virus then enters our sewers, and then we can actually then collect wastewater either within the sewer from manholes, or we can wait till it gets to the headworks of the wastewater treatment plant and take samples there. So we can look at different areas of the community. We could look potentially at maybe just a building or a branch of the collection system by sampling at a certain point within that system, or we could sample that whole community area by sampling with at the headworks of our wastewater treatment facilities. And then we can use that data to then begin to build an understanding of the trends of COVID-19 in particular in our communities or in those catchment areas. And so when we looked at this idea and early in 2020 with the emergence of COVID-19 and thinking about our research as environmental engineers and how we could potentially implement this process here in Nova Scotia. And so the first thing that we knew that we had to do, and so this is a general overview of a wastewater surveillance programs and how they're structured, and we kind of know this structure now, but early in 2020, when we were tapped with COVID-19, we didn't necessarily know this structure. And so the first thing when we wanted to implement a process for Nova Scotia, we looked at first developing a laboratory method to actually measure the virus that causes COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, in a wastewater sample. And so that was our first thing that we needed to do. And so we partnered with one of our longtime research partners, Lumen Ultra Technology, a New Brunswick-based company, and we co-developed a technique actually to extract the SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, its RNA from our wastewater samples. And we were looked at maybe a little bit sideways at this time from some of our colleagues. We all know of these PCR tests, right? We're used to getting, your PCR test. That's the most accurate test. This is also a PCR test. And we know that then there was that explosion of the rapid antigen tests, right? And how it was so nice, they were so fast, you could do them at home, you could get a result very quickly. And that's kind of the approach, prior to the big influx of rats, we were looking at a way that we could actually do wastewater surveillance very rapidly as well. And so, as I said, we were maybe looked at a little bit sideways by some of our colleagues, and that we were really trying to do this rapid, simple technique. But through this partnership, we were able to develop this technique. It's now commercially available. It is the backbone of our wastewater surveillance work that we're doing. So that was really exciting. And it's used now broadly as well for wastewater surveillance programs. So now we had our way to measure COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 in wastewater. And we became, so this is a screenshot that I took early on in the pandemic. There was a website that was tracking university groups that were doing wastewater surveillance and beginning to gain knowledge in how to do this process, and largely university groups. So we put Nova Scotia on the map as a place that could be able to do this test and could be able to detect COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 in wastewater. And so we became, one of very few. So I think this screenshot from this website is from October 2020. You can go to this website, it's called COVID Poops, and you can see that there's now thousands of sites and people doing this work, and so it's amazing. But we were able to put Nova Scotia on the map as a place that could do this, which is pretty cool. And so with that, we had our test in hand, and so we thought, okay, we need to think about this more broadly, and how could we develop a program for our province that we could do wastewater surveillance and get some information from it, right? We've got this test, what can we do? And so to begin this sort of wastewater surveillance program, we started to think about, okay, well, where can we sample, and how can we be, representative of our province? And so we started to develop this program which we implemented for a monitoring program for here in Nova Scotia. And we partnered with Acadia University, so Dr. Jenny Rand is here, with St. FX, with Cape Breton University, some of you probably know Dr. Allison Mackey, to expand our ability to do this method and really extend our university network that could have this test and have the infrastructure to do this test, so we could do it widely across Nova Scotia. And then locally here, worked with partners at Halifax Water to sample at a number of wastewater treatment facilities. So with that, we were able to sort of implement this program. So the next thing we needed to do, we developed our testing kit, we developed our testing sites, looking at how to report this data. And so, we can develop this data. Remember at this time too, there was a lot of interest in caseloads and numbers, and everyone was kind of looking at their computers and seeing if things were going up and down and which wave is this. And so data reporting, became really at the forefront as well, and a lot of interest in data reporting and a lot of interest in concentrations and caseloads. And so at the time, these data dashboards were a lot of interest. And so we were able to develop our own data dashboard to present these data. And so this is just a screenshot from the public dashboard that shows our data. And so the top is just new caseloads in Nova Scotia with active cases in Nova Scotia. And then the bottom is the cumulative viral signal from 4 of the wastewater utilities that or wastewater treatment facilities that we were sampling at. And you can see that as we were entering waves from a caseload perspective and from a PCR test load and what's reported by public health, we could also see increases in the signal in the wastewater. And so this was really telling for wastewater surveillance programs when we started to try to match these data, the wastewater surveillance data, with the clinical numbers, because it began to show a picture that we can actually, those wastewater numbers increase before we see clinical increases. So it gives an early warning sign that maybe we are entering a new wave, or we are, you all probably recall when testing became scarce, or different waves when resources became a little bit more limited in terms of capacities for clinical sampling. Well, the wastewater sampling can continue going even regardless of those scenarios, or when when those types of resources are limited, we don't need for a wastewater sample for people to go to a hospital and take a PCR test. We can actually track it that way. And so seeing these kinds of relationships where we see increases at the same time is really beneficial for the use of wastewater surveillance, and more broadly speaking, its use for potentially other analytes as well. So we were able to see that increase in advance, which is interesting as an early warning sign as well. And so the other thing that we were working on at the same time is, so a lot of these samples are taken at the headworks of wastewater treatment facilities. And so that is labor intensive. There's an auto sampler there. There's someone that has to take a grab sample. We were looking at other testing methods or sampling methods that could be used as opposed to these sort of grab samples and short-term samples. And so Emily Hayes, who is here, led the charge on developing what's called a passive sampler. So while the conventional method of sampling this wastewater would be to, go to the headworks of the wastewater treatment plant and take a grab sample, and if you think about a wastewater treatment plant, it's treating millions of gallons of water. It's a high flow scenario, and you're taking your 1 little liter and then saying, yep, that's the concentration for the day. Or maybe you have an auto sampler that's concentrating that sample over time or collecting that sample over time, and you get a little bit of a better even out of that sample. But it's still labor intensive. It's still requiring an operator to take that sample and some travel and things like that. And then there were other locations that Emily wanted to sample at that weren't the headworks of wastewater treatment plants. So we were looking at, okay, well, building specific factors, maybe there are certain buildings that it would be useful to know if there's a high incidence of COVID-19, within this building. Maybe it's a dormitory or a long-term care center or something like that. And these places don't have auto samplers and don't have easy access to, a quick grab sample. You can't really take a quick grab sample from a manhole. So Emily developed this passive sampler design. So it's this, I've heard it called a wiffle ball on a string, but a 3D printed, very simple, inexpensive design that could be deployed in the sewer, can be left there for 2 days, 3 days, and then brought back up and then analyzed. And so Emily's done some interesting work there where she's compared these grab samples to her passive samplers and found that her passive samplers actually pick up this better signal. They're there and they're concentrating the signal, and we can get a better trend over time. And so it's really a great, easier sample, and then this concentration of the viral signal is amazing. And so and Emily's made some different advances to this as well. So initially she had one adsorbent material and then has worked her way up to other adsorbent materials that are actually more efficient at the concentration and less expensive. And so taking this, this innovation kind of to other levels. And so if we think about our outcomes, so we were able to develop a wastewater surveillance or a pilot wastewater surveillance program for Nova Scotia. And the cool thing now is that these, a lot of these programs were led by environmental engineering groups, by research groups like ours, and now they're being taken over by Public Health Agency of Canada or public health units because they were proven so useful and so interesting to the public. And so a lot of our sampling locations are now part of the provincial program. We were able to develop novel sampling techniques that are now used broadly. We see these requests for this type of sampling and requests for understanding this type of sampling and how it can be used for particularly kind of communal living type environments where maybe an employer or a group kind of wants to know their situation, and using these passive samplers is very useful. We were able to develop a rapid laboratory method that was commercialized and now widely available, which is always cool to be part of from a research group. And then we're able to develop this public dashboard to share these results with the public. So when we think about our sort of new directions, our new directions are really based on this detection. So we have all this backbone. We have all the infrastructure to do this type of testing. We have this extraction technique. We know how to sample, or we're advancing how to sample. Really getting into what are we detecting. So COVID-19 is certainly not the only virus that we're interested in. So we have influenza A, RSV, so interest in potentially tracking other viruses and other public health interests. As well as thinking about this technology, for different applications, maybe within wastewater treatment plants as well, in terms of just broadening our understanding of and our ability to understand our microbial communities, so those that are potentially negative viruses, but also maybe those that are useful for treatment and actually beneficial for different processes. We now have knowledge in these areas to be able to advance different things. And so certainly, like Wendy, I'm not the only person involved in this project. We had a really hardworking, motivated lab team for this program and are still working towards wastewater surveillance innovations. Our research team, my co-investigator, Graham Gagnon, our university partners, as well as our strategic partners, so funding from Research Nova Scotia and Genome Atlantic and NSERC, and then of course all of the staff members that are sampling at wastewater treatment plants and supporting those sampling efforts. So thank you.
Questions?
Hi. One of the things that my mind immediately went to when you were talking about this was nutrient deficiencies on a community scale. Is that something that wastewater treatment could do? Say the next pandemic, low zinc levels is a huge predictor of whether you survive or die from the thing. It could be a great leading indicator in that case too. Is that theoretically possible, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about that, but certainly there's a ton of interest in expanding. Just like we've created here in Nova Scotia, other groups have created in other provinces and across the world these wastewater surveillance networks, and really focused on SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. But realizing we have all the infrastructure, we've created this process, and now we could be, as I said, influenza A, RSV, other analytes. So yeah, it doesn't need to be limited. I'm not familiar exactly with that, but yeah, I think there are a lot more possibilities here than have been explored, and a lot to explore.
Hi, I'm not overly familiar with research methods, but I'm so curious, like the stuff that you presented, there was so many cities in the world that were working on the exact same thing as you at the same time. How does that come into your, project management process? Like, how are you collaborating? Like, when you come up with that invention for the passive sampler, like, does that get communicated? Like, how is that a part of your process or project?
No, that's a great question. For example, for the passive sampler, a lot of the early work, so people were trying to figure out how they could better sample at manholes and better, and so people were using gauze and tampons and different things that could be collecting the sample itself. So Emily was looking at a way to more streamline that process and more, take a more careful approach with it in terms of having a material within the passive sampler that you could be sure that every time it's uniform and every time you're doing the same process. And when you talk about that experimental method, that when you extract the virus from this material, it's always the same, surface area and the same components and the same chemistry. And so once you start to normalize that, then you can be a little bit more certain that you're in the accuracy of your measurements, right? If you're just using, clumps of gauze and things like that to try to collect the sample, you can't really trend that over time very well because you don't have that certainty in that concentration.
Good evening. I am actually very curious to know more about the process in which you take the measurements. Since both genetic material and organic metabolites are susceptible to decomposition, being damaged, how do you take into account in the process to, mitigate any kind of errors that can happen because of that? And also, how would that take place in a passive system where you are not taking the results instantaneously? Finally, I would like to know how this type of process varies depending on what you're measuring. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I think, from a surveillance perspective, I think across the world, everyone was trying to work very rapidly to identify COVID-19, to measure it in the wastewater, to try to find ways to trend concentrations. I think there are still many research gaps in this technology. So there's a lot of space for innovation. And so while we was talking about, heading to different analytes, there's also challenges with, wastewater. It's a very dynamic environment. It's a very dynamic matrix. So there are many unanswered questions in terms of those kinds of aspects. And in terms of, searching for the best passive sampler material, the best way to, show that concentration and trend that concentration over time, and thinking about absorption rates, and there are so many research questions. I would say, wastewater surveillance it's kind of, we've talked about this a little bit, being like, sort of a minimum viable product. It's there, we know that it works, we know that it can, but there are certainly tons of research questions. So no end in sight for our research, that's for sure.
When you mentioned that you can test truck in the wastewater area, I become curious to see a map or trend, but I couldn't see anything. So if it is not confidential, can't you tell us a little about testing drug in the wastewater?
Testing the drugs in the wastewater? Oh, I was just talking about that from my reference to that was just more prior to COVID-19, what was the focus, and so there'd been some tracking of poliovirus just in the literature, and some tracking of illicit drugs, but not the work that we've been doing. Was just more background. Yeah.
You knew it was coming eventually from this corner. Great technical presentation once again. When you developed the idea, or the team developed this idea of doing wastewater surveillance, there may have been some acceptance from some of the community, but there's probably a lot of skepticism along the way of whether this would be useful. How did you win those people over? What tools did you use in your skill set, in your little tool bag there to say, hey, this is a good idea, you need to listen to me? Because I imagine, getting over that skepticism was one of the challenges that the team had.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any kind of innovative research, and you're at the beginning, and there's going to be skepticism. I think you build that knowledge base, you build that evidence. You have a number of peer-reviewed publications. You just kind of keep working on that challenge, and keep building that story. And certainly we're part of a global story. This is the Nova Scotia story, and there are other groups sort of working on this as well. And so, like any research problem, you're building the global evidence, and there's going to be people that'll get on at different points, I guess, in terms of what they need to feel confident in the measurements and where the technology is going. So yeah, I think just keep building the evidence.
Yeah, a question, Dr. Stoddard. I was looking at the data visualization graphs, and I noticed, looking for the correlations between the RNA counts that you were finding versus the actual test results to compare to,
yep.
And certainly noticed, a very strong signal with your RNA counts in around May 2021 that were stronger than the later bump. But yet the active results were lower with a more pronounced signal.
Yep.
So I was wondering if you could explain why that was.
Yeah, I think some of those I think everyone always wants to see that as an evidence of wastewater surveillance. Oh, look, it trends with the clinical cases, but we also know about the clinical testing is limited by the people that go get tested or the availability of tests, and so there's a lot of factors involved in kind of how those are going to line up, and there are other systems where the numbers maybe don't precede the clinical testing, and so I think while people love to see that lining up and that sort of as a proof of wastewater surveillance works, I don't know if it's actually while I showed it even the best sort of weight of the capacity for wastewater surveillance or the utility of wastewater surveillance. So, but that difference is really, I think, a change in testing protocol, in reporting of cases, and factors that we probably can't get at in a sort of uncontrolled kind of type experiment, or type observations, I guess is what we're taking. Yeah.
Hi, Amina.
Hi.
Thanks for a great talk. I recall in the early days of the pandemic, there was a real sense of urgency in the research communities, spread throughout the world, and certainly here in Nova Scotia, you know, to get stuff done quickly, to find solutions. And I'm just wondering, did you encounter that sense of urgency in your work? And if you did, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a great sense of urgency, and I think our team took it as a real drive. I think we really felt like, you know, when we were trying to work to develop that kit, we really felt like we can make a difference. We can start measuring this. We can start, you know, bring this to Nova Scotia. We can, and so yeah, I think all of us felt that, and our students felt that, and I think there was a lot of push to do that. And I think, you know, we had some ideas that were a little bit different around that. We wanted our test kit to be rapid and easy to use, and potentially deployable, like at a wastewater treatment facility, because we saw that maybe that's where it would go. Things have been centralized since then, but yeah, we definitely had that sense of urgency. But I think it just pushed the research. It just pushed, everybody was very eager to help at that time, right? And come up with solutions. So it was a good push for the research, and a good push to see, you know, it's not as often that you see that research go so quickly to, you know, a commercial product, right? So that was amazing. That was a very, very exciting and a really cool outcome of the work for all of those involved.
I think we ran out of time for questions. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you for all our wonderful presenters tonight. As a token of our gratitude, Engineers Nova Scotia is offering a $1,000 entrance scholarship through Techsploration. This scholarship is available to a student who identifies as a woman who is pursuing a degree in engineering and has demonstrated a commitment to creating a better world through supporting their local or global community. Engineers Nova Scotia has long been a proud sponsor to Techsploration, which is a nonprofit organization whose goal is to increase the number of women working in science, engineering, trades, and technology-related occupations by assisting young women from diverse backgrounds to explore a wide range of career options in the fields where women are significantly underrepresented. We'd like to thank our funding partner at Merida Rrecruitment Solutions, as well as our table sponsors for their support in making tonight's event happen. Thank you to the Westin and all of those who prepared and served today's wonderful meal. Of course, none of this could have happened without the hard work of the Women in Engineering Committee. I would ask that the member of our committee please stand so we can acknowledge their work. Well, lastly, thank you to each one of you for joining on this evening, and stay safe out there. We encourage anyone who has worked on innovative projects in Atlantic Canada to consider volunteering to present at future events, or to nominate the project for the Lieutenant Governor's Award for Excellence in Engineering. This award is given annually to a team, company, government department, or consortium of professional engineers who, through original achievement in the application of engineering principles, creative accomplishment in the application of engineering principles, and excellence in engineering designs, demonstrates a high quality and professional engineering standards. So with all that, thank you very much. Last reminder that March is a National Engineering Month, and there are many exciting events coming, including the networking events, virtual town halls, and online professional development opportunities. Please visit the Engineers Nova Scotia website. Last reminder, sorry, your table has card with QR codes for a tonight survey. We always like to improve. And also with the program, if you want to follow up any of the presentations, you can follow the link here. Feel free to stay a bit to socialize if the storm allows it. And thank you, and have a good night.
unscripted moment. For all of you who are in the Halifax area, the Engineers Canada National 30 by 30 Conference is going to be held here in Halifax on the 24th of May. It's going to be a great opportunity to hear from leaders in industry, talk to panels about, there'll be panels on women in engineering and how to support each other, allyship. So mark it on your calendar, look for more information, but I wanted you to hold the date in there. It's going to be a fabulous event. Thanks very much for coming tonight. Be safe on the way out.
Maybe it feels like we're running out of time.